Good evening, everybody. I'm Kathy Van Ness. I'm so excited to be here tonight on this rainy, beautiful evening with a great group of guests. Dr. Carole Banka received her MS from Adelphi University and her PhD from the UCSF School of Medicine. And she did her postdoctoral training at the I can say this late at night, of course, USSD School of Medicine. She's held faculty positions at Scripps, at La Jolla Institute for Molecular Medicine. Now try that a little late at night, 5 times in a row. Molecular medicine, great word. And adjunct faculty position at Northern Arizona University. She was director of women's health research at the La Jolla Institute for Molecular Medicine. She serves as a chair as a Doris A. Howell Foundation for Women's Health Research. Her list was so long. I've done a lot of these. It was 4 pages. I had to edit. So I'm just letting you know ahead of time. I left some things out that you've done because you've done a whole lot.
You're exaggerating.
She has a keen ability to translate complex medical information for non-medical audiences. That certainly is us, I think, and brings an infectious enthusiasm and humor to discussions of serious health subjects. In addition to her public speaking, which is why I'm so excited to talk to her tonight, she's working on her book, Sex Beyond 70, and A Woman's Guide to Healthy Aging, something that's really important. So we're going to start with a little healthy aging, and then we're going to migrate to her recent book she's working on. How does that sound? Being happy just doesn't improve the quality of your life, and according to a new study, it may increase the quantity of your life as well. Can you share with us a couple of secrets on your women's guide to healthy aging?
I think the thing that comes to mind immediately when you ask that question is Alzheimer's. And if you look at the 2 big studies that are being done on Alzheimer's disease, it's very clear that people who are happy, primarily because they have social connections, they have people that love them, they are protected. Now that doesn't mean they won't get Alzheimer's. I mean, there's a belief that if you live long enough, every single one of us will have a cognitive decline. But they say that having close relationships with your children, your adult children, unless they're adverse relationships, and then you go the other way. But all these things, these social things, like what all of us are doing here tonight, makes us happy. It's really important, particularly for women, and it does seem to protect against Alzheimer's.
You know, that seems so logical. Why is it that, and it seems so optimism, and actually there's a question in here, so I'm just going to jump ahead because I know the question. Optimism leads to a longer life. Optimism is different from positivity, of course. It's a different way to think about things. Why are we not more optimistic about life?
Happiness is about 50% genetic.
That is so interesting.
So
I did not know that.
50% of how you look at life is under your control, and about 50% of it is sort of genetic, your biochemical makeup, your brain, etc. So you have control over 50%, and if you want to be happy, you know, some of these things I think are just decisions. I discovered this when my husband had a stroke when he was very young, and it took me about 9 months to relate to what my new life was going to be. And one morning I woke up and I thought, well, I got 2 choices. I can wake up in the morning happy, or I can make up in the morning mourning what's happened to him and our marriage and the whole 9 yards. And so there is a significant portion of happiness and optimism that is under our own control, but only about half of it.
That's so interesting. If so, then how do we tap into the other 50%? If genetics is part of it, then what about the other 50?
The part that we
gotta go
have
find.
control over.
Exactly.
Yeah,
How do we find that?
We have to make the decision that it's important to us, and just go do it, I think. I mean, I'm not a psychologist.
It's a big conversation day. I just interviewed Gretchen Rubin a few weeks ago in New York and in here. And she wrote the book, The Happiness Project, by the way. If anybody's read it.
It's a great book.
Has anybody read it?
I have.
It's a great
It's
book.
a really
Did you
great
do the 4
book.
tendencies?
I didn't. I'm only about halfway
Oh, no,
through.
I definitely recommend it. It's a great book. We're going to start a book club here because we've got so many great books. Scientists do not know why women's brains are more vulnerable. But neuroimaging studies have shown that men and women's brains function differently when they're speaking, seeing, or relaxing. Can you elaborate in your research?
I'm not a neuroscientist, so this is not my work. And I don't know if any of you have followed Dr. Daniel Amen when he's been on NPR, but one of my favorite things of his, and I really believe this is true in all aspects of life, is that men's brains are compartmentalized. So based on his work, I made a slide that has all these little boxes in the man's brain, and none of them is touch. There's no touching of the children's brain with the job brain, with the car mechanic problem brain. And then, of course, the woman's brain just looks like a ball of yarn that's been tossed by a cat, because everything touches. And it's just dawned on me recently, and I think I've gone completely off the topic of what you asked.
No, you're doing good. Is that a case in all animals, or is it just only humans? Do you think that because we know that male and female animals are different, and we know we came from male and female, so does it carry throughout the kingdom?
There are no other animals that function at the level we do neurologically, possibly dolphins and whales, but we don't know enough about them to know. But this idea that, so it's suddenly dawned on me that with men and women, sex is the same way. The sex box in his brain does not touch the children box, the Mother's Day box, the work box. And so he's all about whatever's going on at the moment, whereas she's going, oh, did I remember to pick up the dry cleaning? And, trying to become sexually aroused, but remembering that the fourth graders, play project hasn't been finished yet. And so, and I've never heard Amen talk about it in relation to sexual activity, but it makes sense. And there's a different chemical. I mean, the biochemistry is both men and women make estradiol, estrogen, and testosterone and progesterone, but they do it's in different ratios. And that has a significant effect on brain patterning when we're very young.
Interesting.
And so the men's brains are patterned. Actually, estrogen has a lot to do with men's brain patterning when they're young. And
Well, you are I know you've done a lot of work on hormone replacement in therapy. And I thought, therapy, it got a bad name after 2002 studies and all kinds of heart complications and things. I think that's kind of a different story today. But in your research, what's happened in this area? What has been happening?
my research has been, because I'm not an MD, I'm a mouse doctor, so it's all been with animals. And in my animal studies, estrogen has been very protective against atherosclerotic heart disease, which is the plaque in the arteries.
And you're testing on female as well as male?
And female mostly, but I also did a study in males. And testosterone was protective, but a compound called DHA, dihydrotestosterone, was not. Testosterone gets converted to estrogen. DHA does not. So my theory, and estrogen was also very protective in the males. So you had estrogen and testosterone, which could be converted to estrogen, protecting, and the androgen, the testosterone that couldn't be converted, was not protective. So I think it's estrogen that's protecting both male and female. But interestingly, a new study came out. You're exactly right that in 2002, the first arm of the Women's Health Initiative was stopped, and you could not find a doctor to prescribe estrogen in this country. Last year, an 18-year study was finished. I think it was headquartered at Cleveland Clinic. I'm not positive about that. But it showed that particularly for women who take estrogen only, and if they take it at the time of menopause, that it's not dangerous, and that we don't need to have this lowest possible dose for shortest period of time. They showed that women who had been on it for well more than 10 years were fine. The problem with the Women's Health Initiative is they were putting women who hadn't seen an estrogen molecule in 25 years back on estrogen. They probably had no receptors. And so they had adverse effects, which is not surprising.
Right.
When they broke the study out and looked at the women who had gone into the study between the ages of 50 and 60, they were all protected. But of course, when they first broke the news, they hadn't done the breakout on the basis.
Oh my gosh! Isn't it? You just have to.
Yeah.
You have to keep studying.
Yeah.
It's just not the first
and
glance.
Women all over the country for probably a decade after that were suffering from hot flashes and all these side effects because doctors wouldn't prescribe estrogen. So the pendulum's swinging back now. As soon as people become of this study that was published last year, I think it'll get easier and easier.
Wow. What got you to write this book? The Sex Over 70, the one we all want to really talk about, girls, right?
Yes.
I mean, come on. So, let's get to the heart of the book we're still working on. We've got the estrogen and the exercise down and the brain stuff.
The basic stuff.
Now, that is just what inspired you, and did you have a personal story that helped you get there?
So about 15 years ago, I heard an interview with a young female physician who'd been called back to a patient's room, having already made rounds on that patient. And it was a woman who was being discharged the next day, and she wasn't quite sure why she was back in this woman's room, but the woman, who I think was in her late 70s or early 80s, says, "I'm sorry I had to call you back, but I couldn't discuss this in front of my son. I've been having a sexual relationship with a man for 6 years. My son would be appalled, but I needed to know from you if there's anything I need to be careful about once I'm discharged from the hospital." The physician realized she was also a bit horrified that her 82-year-old patient was having a sexual relationship. So she polled all the doctors she worked with, and they were all, you know, at some level or another, surprised up to horrified. And so she did a national study and she published it. And I just thought, how is it possible that all these MDs in our country think it's weird? Well, then you add and then my antennae went up. And I've collected story after story. Joan Rivers not getting a laugh when she talked about her lover not whispering her name in bed the first night she brought out that joke. The next night she told it as her husband, and it brought the house down because nobody wanted to know that Joan Rivers, the 50-something-year-old widow, was having sex with somebody who wasn't her dead husband.
I spent a lot of time on this conversation, and studies like this blow the lid off of inaccurate information and potentially dangerous stereotypes that persist about late life sexuality. In many parts of the world, including the U.S., senior sexuality is a taboo subject that is ripe for ridicule. So you're like 100% on. I've spent hours reading this to prepare for you. That makes many older adults hesitant to talk about sex and dispel myths with friends, families, or even children. So if we also, in another question, the population is doubling. Physically, 1 out of 10, in 2000, 1 out of 10 people was 65. In 2030, I think I've got the numbers right, 50% of the population is going to be over 60. Well, why wouldn't we? What are we going to be doing? I mean, we can't just be doing gardening.
And 35% of people over 50 in this country are single.
Yes.
So.
And men are having more sex than women.
And women are wanting to have more sex. Yeah.
Yes.
But
why is this?
They don't have partners.
Are women feeling, women want so much now to have power, and power in the corner office, and power at the job, and all this power. Why wouldn't it be power in the bedroom?
I think it's probably the last frontier.
I just thought of the same word as you were going there.
Yeah.
But it's taking so long to get there.
Yeah. So here's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot. I'm not a sex therapist. I've been reading a lot of sex therapists. And I mean, the big C word is not what you think it is. It's communication. And that's the problem. Women are too hesitant or shy, particularly in my age group, because we grew up with all these taboos. You didn't talk about it, whatever. And they're hesitant to tell men what they want. And I think of it like we had a cooking lesson last night. So I think about it as cooking a meal. And you've got all these spices. And you're making curry, let's say. So wouldn't you ask your partner if they like curry, how much, how you go to a curry restaurant and you can get it from hotness of 1 to 10. Wouldn't you ask your partner, are you a spice around a 3 or maybe an 8?
That's really, I like that, though. I think that's actually clever.
And
you're right.
Why wouldn't you also ask him what he enjoys in the bedroom, and in trade, tell him what you enjoy in the bedroom? And this is one reason I'm writing the book. I want women, I grew up a prude. Sex in the City saved me. I had daughters at just the right age to make me sit down and watch it with them. And Kim Cattrall, you know, became
God
my
love her.
hero.
Yeah, the sushi, especially the one with the sushi. Remember the picture with the sushi?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we all know that scene, right? Oh my gosh, that's a great scene.
Yeah, yeah, right. He doesn't show up.
No, he doesn't need to. She's got it covered on that sushi scene.
Anyway, you know, we need to talk more about it. We need to talk about.
So, well, what would if this population is doubling, and it's clear women are not having as much sex as men, and there's going to be more women left, what in your writing this great book, what are your guidance for these for women? How do we change that pendulum? Is it going to change in the new generation, first of all? There's going to be a couple questions here. Is it changing as we go down the pike?
The baby boomers are much more sexually active than previous generations. And so in some ways it's going to be easier for them they're hitting 70 now, and it will be easier for them to transition. But society is still not going to look at it. In the abstract, sex among the elderly is fine. If it's your great Aunt Sally, suddenly it's very yucky. Yeah. And so...
Grandma and Grandpa, hello.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
The stories,
yeah.
Yes. For women, there is self-pleasuring. We all know that men masturbate. It's kind of a given. Jokes are, about it. Women have not really been given the permission to learn about their own bodies and about the pleasure they might be able to generate. I'm just learning now about toys, and I was talking with Margarita and remembering Kim Cattrall and the rabbit.
Yes, it had a little hook on it, if I remember.
The first toy site I went to on the internet, there was the rabbit.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, I know that rabbit.
But toys are becoming more popular, I read.
They are. They're becoming much more popular. You have to be careful as to the products they're made with. And there's all sorts of things I'm learning about interactions between lubricants and latex. And,
Is that
so
good?
there's, well, you have to.
We want as many details as we can get.
You have to, okay, so first of all, people should still be using condoms. Let's start with that. The greatest increase, not the highest rate, but the greatest increase in STDs is happening in the over 60 population, because everybody thinks they don't have to worry about pregnancy anymore, therefore they don't use protection. Well, guess what? You've got to use protection for other reasons, unless you know your partner, if you've been with your partner forever and you're monogamous and you know that both of you. I'll tell you that when my daughters became of an age to begin exploring sexual relationships, I told them, I'm not putting any restrictions on you other than to say, if you meet a young man that you are really excited about and want to sleep with, you have him get an AIDS test, because this was in the era when AIDS was still rampant. And so then when I began dating again, I decided, I guess, I had to make the same rules for me that I made for my daughters, and I would recommend that if you meet somebody new, make a deal that both of you will get tested, and you can come together and say, no diseases here, especially HIV, the deadly one. There is an increase, particularly in syphilis, which I was rather surprised by.
And believe it or not, by the way, that is a fact. It's happening faster at the older segment of population than it is the younger segment of population.
Because they're not being careful.
Right. The younger population is being more careful, that's right. So what guidelines are you looking to tell people in your book? What is your goal for this book?
Well, my goal is to try to eliminate the taboo, first of all, which, if you look at Western cultures, is, I would say, uniquely American. A friend of mine was telling me when he goes to the nude beaches on the Riviera, there are women of all ages and shapes and sizes. You go to a nude beach in this country, you never see a woman over 35. Because, so number one, let's overcome the stigma associated with sex in the elderly. Number two, women have to deal with self-image issues. When we were all young and lithe, it was probably fun to run around naked with our husbands or our boyfriends or whatever, because, we had cool bodies and whatever. No, not so much. And so, you have to get past that so that you can.
But that's big though, because the woman's ego.
Yeah.
How do we help women? We help them in so many other ways. How do we help women be able to feel freer about their bodies and freer about sexuality, so actually they can, at a time in life when stress should be maybe less, the kids are gone, you're not really proving your job hopefully anymore.
Exactly.
You're really actually
kids
mentally
are gone, the
much
dog
free.
has
Yeah,
died.
The dog has died.
Right.
Your house is paid for probably, or almost, whatever.
Yeah.
And you have this great chance to really enjoy life like you never could have enjoyed it before. But
Well, now you've got two populations of women. You've got the women who have raised the children and watched the dog die with a husband of 25 or 30 or 50 years. That's one scenario. Then you have women who are in committed but maybe not so long-term relationships, and then you have the women who are not in relationships. So it's a different answer for each of those populations. For the woman who's been married for 40 years, it's how do you rekindle once the kids are gone? How do you rekindle that enjoyment of a physical relationship? And that it takes work.
it takes work.
And for women who are in shorter term relationships, hopefully some of that spark is still there. It's very normal for that spark only to last 9 months, a year, whatever, because it's actually biochemical. When you fall in love, there are different brain chemicals that come into play, and that only lasts for a certain period
Is
of time.
that right?
Yeah.
Did you all know that?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
So that'll be in the-
9
in the
months,
book.
literally?
Well, 9 months
Being-
to a year.
It's like having a
For
baby.
some people,
Yeah.
it really lasts a long time.
Yeah.
But for the average person, you probably are not, from the moment you say first slept with someone you're in love with, I would say a year to 18 months later, it's just not quite as exciting as it was, and that's biochemical. But you can use your brain to overcome that, and.
But you do have to work at it, don't you?
I think
I mean, I
so,
think you
yeah.
can't just expect it to come knocking
Well,
at the
yeah,
door.
especially at our age, because
Yeah.
our bodies aren't working the same
No.
way, and they're probably not as lithe and wonderful as they were. back then.
Why is this not a bigger conversation? Why? I mean, sexuality is definitely is now being connected, by the way, to longer life and happiness, and exactly what you opened the conversation with: communication and finding joy. Why are we not talking about this more?
Because we're American.
Because we're
So there's something very interesting. My 14-year-old grandson had his first sex ed class last week, and I had been the one chosen to do the birds and the bees with him, a month or a year or whatever prior. And so we chatted a bit about it, and he was not sharing much. But I read him a little article I'd run across that in Holland, when they do sex ed, there is a big focus on the pleasure involved with a sexual relationship, and how enriching it can be for a man and a woman to bond together in a relationship that will lead to sex and all of that. And in America, you hear about disgustingly icky, ooey gooey infections, and pregnancy, how you can get pregnant. And I mean, and as a result, there's a very open conversation. Now, we all know the Netherlands and the red light districts and everything, but it's more than that. It's from very young, they are taught that this is something to celebrate, something to talk about, and something to enjoy. And we're taught, that it's shameful, and we could get oozing infections, and we could have unwanted pregnancies.
My goodness. We had an interesting conversation, and I know you ladies will all think this is interesting. It was about how women, and probably men too, don't really touch themselves, and sort of remind themselves, if no one's touched you for a while, it's hard to get that feeling back, and that what happened to just touching yourself, maybe not even masturbation, just touching your skin. Just learning to touch your skin so you can want that experience again. Are there certain kinds of tips that women over 60 or 70 could use to help garner a spark back in their life, or is it just the logical things?
Well, if they have a partner, let's talk about if you have a partner. There was a book I read right before I got married, however many decades ago. It was written by a minister to his daughter who was about to get married, and it was called Letters to Karen. And the thing that stuck with me was that he said your sexual relationship should start at the breakfast table. And, you know, you just, a little flirtation, a little touching, and then you go off and you think about it all day, and it builds and it builds and it builds until nighttime. And that's wonderful, except for our generation. I mean, we should still think about it that way. The problem is, 11 o'clock at night is probably the worst possible time for a man especially to have sex at our age. It's when testosterone is the lowest, melatonin is the highest, which works against it. And so one of the tips is, you know, maybe think about doing it in the morning. And the other thing, from what I've read, women don't feel like it. You can't use headaches, by the way, as an excuse anymore, because we know that sex often will cure a migraine headache. At least if you have an orgasm, it may...
News, right?
It may fix your migraine. But there are, you know, if your partner is coming on to you and he's interested and you think, oh God, not again tonight, just, you know, go with it. Go with the flow and see what happens. If he's good, he may really, even though you're not that interested, you know, he may spark a little arousal there, and you could have a good time. And I mean,
and there's a clear fringe benefit to this. The fringe benefit is physical, clearly physical, and happier, and longer life. There's clearly, if you are looking for that moment, right, of you can think about it in a grander scheme, like not only am I going to feel good, but I'm going to do something good for myself.
Oh, yeah. You sleep better. It lowers your stress levels. And that's kind of a loop. The sleep, the sex, the stress, you know, if you don't sleep well enough, you're probably have a higher stress level just because you haven't slept. So, and if you have a higher stress level, you're probably really not in the mood for sex. And so, you know, if you can kind of get all that cycling, really good night's sleep, try sex in the morning. You know, maybe you'll be stress-free all day.
Advice from Golden Door, ladies.
And, you know, and you have to want it. You have to want it if you're not interested in, and that's fine. I've talked with many women who say, oh my God, you know, long ago, stop that. I'm not really interested in pursuing it. That's fine. There's no right answer. But the one thing I would say about that, if we just take relationships instead of just sex, again, it's really important, particularly for women, to have these connections with each other. There's a brain chemical called oxytocin. There are 3 times when it's really high, and that is during childbirth, when you're nursing your baby. That's the milk letdown hormone. When the baby cries, it's oxytocin that signals your milk. And the 3rd time is when you have an orgasm. However, you can also induce oxytocin simply through a 20-second hug. And I give talks where I make everybody stand up and hug the person next to them for 20 seconds, and you have no idea how long 20 seconds can seem. Yeah. But oxytocin may be one of the things that is protective against Alzheimer's, that this communal interaction of women. There were twin sisters in the Chicago, the Loyola study, and they lived in a nursing home, and they had very comparable lives. And one of them was like the organizer. She was out there every day making sure they were having their shopping trip and this and that and the other. And the other one was a complete recluse. And guess what? The other one developed all the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And she passed away first, and her brain looked like a typical Alzheimer's brain. And then the gregarious sister, who had never shown a symptom of Alzheimer's in her life, passed away, and guess what? Her brain looked just like her sister's.
Really?
She had all the neurofibrillary tangles and plaques that if you had not known her, you would have said, oh my God, full-blown Alzheimer's, just like her sister. So that community that I think evolutionarily, remember, we were the ones that had to protect the children when the guys went out with their clubs to beat the mammoth. And then you get to the, the Western lore of circling the wagons to protect the children. It's biological. And for us to bond like that is really very important. And so I would say that that's probably as important as having a healthy sex life.
I interviewed Tony Butner on Blue Zones. You might know that book.
Yeah,
You heard of Blue Zones? Another great book, right?
It is a great
and
book.
And I think what you're saying, Carole, is really very interesting, because one of the longevity issues that came across the 5 different zones that he was talking about, one of them California, which is fascinating, was, Melinda, was camaraderie, bonding, family, relationships, community. It was so logical and simple that it seemed like, do we really know our neighbors today? Do we, throw a picnic party and everybody comes over for the table and we share the neighborhood news? Probably not as much anymore, right? No. So and as we get older as females, we are going to be alone. The numbers say, no question about it, more females will be alone, and we're going to live longer.
Yep.
We're going to live to 100.
Oh, yeah.
No question about that. So what do we do in this last part of our life to regain relationships and sexuality?
Well, younger men are wonderful. I consider myself a cougar. I have a boyfriend that's
Share your
a
personal
year
story.
and 3 months younger than I am. And that was actually the other spur for writing this book. After I'd been collecting all these stories that were, were other people's stories, and I met someone when I was turning 70. I was 69 when I met him, and he was about to turn 68. And we found ourselves reveling in the fact that we had this wonderful physical relationship, and we're going, wow, are we lucky or what? We're like 70.
Because your friends aren't doing that.
Yeah. And I think that kind of cemented this. I'd been carrying this idea around with me for 10 or 15 years, and I thought, well, other people should enjoy this. And there are difficulties. Things don't work like they used to. But if you're willing to work around that, we have all kinds of medications now. We've got the blue pills. Now they're the white pills, because the blue pills are off patent. And we've got the pink pills for women. And it's something that makes me crazy. So men have erectile dysfunction. Not their fault, dysfunction. We have hypoactive sexual desire disorder. Obviously our own fault, right? Because it's a disorder rather than a dysfunction. So anyway, we have pills for that, which are fairly controversial, and it's not clear they work. But there are all sorts of.
But are women going to be brave enough to sort of conquer that first hurdle, is to ask the question, like, I struggle with this and this is what I need?
Who
That's
knows?
the question, right?
If we get a book written.
Yeah, you need to get that book written. I really think this is an important book. I don't think enough conversation has been done. Yeah. We always are getting asked at Golden Door about happiness and joy and mindfulness and peace and being happy together. And I think that this book you're writing is very interesting, because it's adding another level for women, because sexuality is so important that we really are not talking about. We're not really grappling with the fact that many of the men, I'll tell you an interesting statistic. I actually wasn't going to ask this question because I knew the answer. 54% of the men at a certain age, 60s, are having sex, and only 30% of the women. Well, the answer to that question is really easy. They're not having sex with the women. They're having sex with the younger women.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Yeah. That's a serious problem. And when you see that almost 20% difference.
And I wonder if that isn't going to change a bit. Because
I'm wondering that.
I think men are getting a little, I don't know if smarter is the right word, but I think they're coming to value more than just how a woman looks. They're coming to value like a shared history, that your music and my music, if she's doing rap and you're doing rock and roll, maybe it doesn't work quite as well. So, but there will never be enough men to go around unless you share them.
Right.
And there's that. There's younger men. There's learning to to pleasure yourself, and it, you know, it's interesting. I was reading a list of all the benefits, and there was one, and I wish I could remember what it was, but there was one that is only works as a benefit if you have a partner. It doesn't work if you're, you know, bringing on the pleasure yourself. So, but in most cases, an orgasm is an orgasm in terms of
No matter which way you
benefits.
have it.
Yeah.
Right, that's
Yeah.
good news.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's the same as the man, right?
I would think
Pretty
so.
much.
Yeah.
So what's next for Carole? When do you, first let me ask a different, when is the book going to be done? Because we want you to launch it at Golden Door.
Within a,
Don't you?
Yeah.
We're gonna, you guys are going to be the test study. I'm going to send you all one.
Well,
I'm going to take your names, and you were so brave to sit to me. Let me tell you something. I wanted to have this conversation. I've been waiting for a long time to talk to Carole. I think her book is going to be really interesting. And I want to commend all of you tonight for sitting here with me and having a conversation, because I think it's one we should talk about more. I think we should be more sexual when we're older. I think it's crazy that my kids wouldn't think I'm terrible about having sex, but I can tell you many kids, ooh, mom and dad having sex, yuck.
Well,
But I think it's going to be
yeah.
it's a good conversation.
It's a good conversation, but older children, adult children, no matter who you end up hooking up with, very often have a problem. But then, and then there's this whole thing about nursing homes, because there's no privacy there. And nursing homes are now becoming aware, and there will be a whole section in the book about that. They are now beginning to have private rooms, or at least giving their some do not disturb. I have a friend who was
so cute.
Ran a nursing facility up in Portland, and she told me so many stories, but one of them that really tugged at my heart was a man who had an independent living facility on the 5th floor. Had a wife who was in the extended care facility, and they'd been there for almost a year, and he finally went to probably my friend and said, you know, I haven't had marital relations with my wife since we've moved here. And I mean, a light bulb went off. And then from then on, every Thursday afternoon, one of the orderlies took her in a wheelchair to the 5th floor to his apartment. All that was needed was for him to have the courage to say that this is what they wanted. And I think nursing homes are becoming more and more aware that this is a basic biological need that should be honored. And then you get into the whole dementia and consent issues. But another friend here in San Diego told me that her mother had contracted Alzheimer's, had been put in a nursing home. The parents were still married. The father was living on his own. And they got a call from the nursing home that she has struck up a relationship with this man, and they have expressed a desire to have sex. And the woman's still married, but she doesn't even know who her husband is when he comes to see her. So the family said, fine. So my friend said the next time she went in, the door to her mother's room was closed, and she knocked on the door, and this very quiet voice said, come in. And she walked in, and they were in bed with the sheets pulled up under their chins, and they were just chuckling away. And she just thought it was really cute.
Aww.
And apparently her dad was fine with it, because he knew that he couldn't have that relationship.
Yeah.
But I mean, the legal complexities of that whole scenario, you know, could keep you busy for weeks.
Oh my gosh, I could talk about this forever. There is so much to talk about. We are really just starting this conversation. You know, every night we're here, and I want to leave time for questions and answers, because Carole knows so much more scientifically than I can even ask these questions. Every week we interview, I ask our guests to give you all, our guest, a golden nugget. It's like my last question. So you tonight, my dear, and I hope it's a really good one, come on. It's a good soft conversation. I would love for you to give them a golden nugget. It's an idea,
I
it's a
think
suggestion.
it's what I started with, which is communicate. Communicate with each other, like you're doing right here, and communicate with partners if you have them, or if you meet them. You know, don't be shy. We're not second-class citizens. Our experiencing pleasure is just as important as a man experiencing pleasure. So don't sell yourself short. communicate what you want. And you've paid a price to be here. So many of you have raised children, you've supported husbands, etc. It's our time,